Welcome to the History of the Bible, Episode 114, A Pause in the Chaos. In the last episode, we concluded the time of Jephthah as judge over the land of Gilead, on the east side of the Jordan River. Before getting into one of the major judges, who many know, there occurred three more judges between the time of Jephthah and this other judge. These judges are only briefly mentioned in the Bible. Those three judges are Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon. A total of 8 verses are written about the three judges. After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem led Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. He gave his daughters away in marriage to those outside of his clan. And for his sons, he brought in 30 young women as wives from outside his clan. Ibzan led Israel for 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried in Bethlehem. It is believed that Ibzan was a judge between the years 1094 and 1087 BC. When it talks about Bethlehem, scholars are not sure which Bethlehem it is referring to. There are 2 cities named Bethlehem. The first one is in Judah. This is the one everyone thinks of when talking about the city. The place where Jesus would be born, from the line of King David. However, there is another Bethlehem. This one is located in the territory given to the tribe of Zebulun. This one is not known of at all, although it could be the location where Ibzan, a judge in Israel, was living. Jewish tradition holds that Ibzan is another name for Boaz. We'll come to find out Boaz is one of King David's ancestors. If you aren't sure who King David is, we'll find out more about him later on. Who Boaz is will be looked at more in depth when we study the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth is believed to have happened during the period of the Judges, as it mentions no kings ruling over the tribes of Israel. Whether or not Ibzan is the same person as Boaz from the book of Ruth is still to be determined. The main reason it is believed Ibzan is the same person as Boaz is because they came from the same location, Bethlehem. Although this is an assumption that Ibzan came from Bethlehem in the territory given to the tribe of Judah. The only reason why it is assumed that Bethlehem within Judah is being talked about is because of its historical importance. Without getting into the whole book of Ruth, we will save that for another time. But we do want to look at the context of who Ibzan is, and could he be the one and the same person as Boaz? Here's a very, very quick summary of the book of Ruth. The story begins with Naomi, an Israelite woman who moves to Moab with her husband and her 2 sons due to a famine in Israel. Her husband and sons all die, leaving Naomi and her 2 daughter-in-laws, Orpah and Ruth, widowed. Naomi decides to return to Israel and urges her daughter-in-laws to stay in Moab and remarry. While Orpah eventually returns to her people, Ruth chooses to stay with Naomi, famously saying, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay." This moment of loyalty is central to the whole story. Back in Bethlehem, Ruth works in the fields of Boaz, a relative of Naomi's deceased husband. Boaz takes notice of Ruth's kindness and hard work in following Jewish law. He eventually marries her, providing security for her and Naomi. The story concludes with Ruth and Boaz having a son named Obed, who becomes the grandfather of King David. Don't worry, we will be taking the time to dive into the whole book in later episodes. In the book of Ruth, there is no mention of Boaz having children outside the child he had with Ruth. This may be simply due to historians emphasizing the line of King David. Ibzan, the judge over Israel, had 60 kids, 30 sons, and 30 daughters, a lot more than what is mentioned in the book of Ruth. Although the children aren't mentioned in the book of Ruth, it does not mean Boaz did not have any other children. Jewish tradition attempts to justify the discrepancy between the absence of children in the book of Ruth and the 60 children of Ibzan. They say that when Ibzan married off his 60 children, he did not send an invitation to the parents of Samson. Samson will be our up-and-coming judge for the Israelites. The invitation was not sent to there being a rivalry between the tribes. Because of not sending an invite to Samson's parents, divine punishment came upon Ibzan, and all 60 of his children died. Thus, when it speaks of no children in the book of Ruth, it's because all of those children died off before Ruth came into Boaz's life. The difference in names from Ibzan and Boaz is not too much of an issue. Many judges and other people in the Bible are found to have multiple names. Though Jewish tradition says Ibzan and Boaz are the same person, there are others who would say otherwise. Other Jewish scholars and ancient historians believe the connection of Ibzan and Boaz being the same person was done to romanticize the lineage of King David. How much better it does sound. The king of Israel was a descendant of a judge. Those scholars who believe Ibzan and Boaz are not the same person believe the city of Bethlehem, which Ibzan came from, was not the one located in Judah's territory. Rather, it was the lesser-known city of Bethlehem in the territory given to the tribe of Zebulun. These scholars go off the context of the book of Judges. All the judges leading up to Ibzan and those judges who would come directly after him are all from the northern tribes. Gideon, Abimelech, Tola, Jair, and Jephthah are all judges from the northern tribes. The judges after Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon are also from the northern tribes. Scholars look at the Bible and believe it would be odd or out of place for Ibzan to be the only judge to come from the southern tribes. If he were from a southern tribe, it is believed it would have been noted. Looking at other factors, the majority of threats came from the north as well as the east. Very few threats came from the south or the Egyptian territories, until later on when the Philistines would settle into the land south of the tribes of Israel. The issue is we do not know which one is correct. Scholars stand on both sides of the argument and present their respective views on what they believe is right. Either way, the only notable event that occurred during Ibzan's time as a judge was the marriage of his 30 children. In ancient times, marriages were often used as tools for political alliances. With the disunity of the tribes, having marriages between the tribes, as Ibzan did, would strengthen the political alliances between those tribes. Often, we think it was looked down on for members of one tribe to marry members of another tribe. But this was allowed by God. The only restrictions God placed on the Israelites were for them to not marry other nations and their peoples. Therefore, Ibzan did not do anything wrong with having his children marry outside of the tribe. So though very little is mentioned of Ibzan, the marriages he arranged were meant to bring the tribes into unity with each other. A means of diplomacy that would bring peace within the tribes of Israel. Not all judges were meant to lead the tribes through military victory. That is also what we see in the next two judges after Ibzan. Elon and Abdon were not military leaders. They were judges who brought peace and stability. Again, very little is said of these two judges. Elon, the Zebulite, led Israel for 10 years. Then Elon died and was buried in Ajalon, in the land of Zebulun. After him, Abdon, the son of Hil from Parathon, led Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys. He led Israel for 8 years. Then Abdon, the son of Hil, died and was buried at Parathon, and Ephraim, and the hill country of the Amalekites. This is all that is said of the two judges. Abdon has a little bit more mention regarding him. He had a large family. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on donkeys. Riding a donkey was a luxury. Most donkeys were used for pack animals, and a normal household would not have the funds to have an additional donkey to ride on. Therefore, Abdon is portrayed as a very wealthy man who is influential in the region. Both of the judges are pictured as judges who led in the time of peaceful diplomacy, aligning the tribes in unity. Jewish tradition suggests the reason for the small amount written about these two judges was not meant to show how little they were valued, but rather it was out of respect for what they did. These judges, including Ibzan, were meant to show the time of peace within the land given to the tribes of Israel. Now, whether or not there was peace in the land, or it simply does not mention the conflict occurring in the land, in addition, if it was a time of peace, it was due to the people finally pursuing the Lord, as it was meant to be from the beginning. Or was it the Lord blessing the tribes because they were his people, and he wanted to show himself to the Israelites? Unfortunately, we do not know what occurred during this time. We do know the world surrounding the tribes of Israel were in chaos. However, there is another reality. The good times would not last. The location of the judges mentioned have all been in the northern and eastern territories belonging to the tribes of Israel. The southern tribes still had their issues. This is where we will introduce our next judge. His name would be Samson. Before diving into the man Samson, we're going to set the scene. In Judges 10 verses 7 it says, "The Lord became angry with them. He sold them into the hands of the Philistines and the Ammonites." This is when Jephthah would come into the scene as a judge and would lead the Gileadites into victory over the Ammonites. Nothing is ever mentioned of the Philistines. The Lord allowed for both the Philistines and the Ammonites to conquer the tribe of Israel. As we learn with Jephthah, the Ammonites would oppress the tribes for 18 years. In Judges 13 verse 1 it says, "The Philistines oppressed the Israelites for 40 years. To give a sneak peek, Samson would lead the tribes of Israel for 20 years. Those 20 years were spent during the time the Philistines were oppressing the Israelites. Many other judges led the people of Israel out of oppression and back into the covenant with the Lord. Samson would lead while being oppressed by the Philistines. Two things. Either with Jephthah coming into the leadership of the Israelites, he also removed the oppression of the Philistines, although it never mentions it, or the oppression from the Philistines started when the Ammonites began oppressing the Israelites. The Philistines would come from the south, and the Ammonites came from the southeast. The Ammonites would only last 18 years in oppressing the Israelites, until Jephthah came and led them to victory. If the Philistines oppressed the tribes for 40 years, starting at the time the Ammonites began, the tribes in the south were being oppressed while the tribes in the north and east were in a time of peace. The time frame of Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon leading in the north was a total of 31 years. With the Ammonites oppressing for 18 years, that would total just about 50 years. So while the Philistines were oppressing the southern tribes for an additional 22 years, the eastern and northern tribes enjoyed 31 years of peace. Although it could be another time span of 40 years of oppression beginning after Jephthah defeated the Ammonites, if that is the case, then after Jephthah, all the tribes of Israel stepped into a time of peace. Either way, they would not stay there for long. 40 years of oppression was done by the Philistines upon the tribes of Israel for losing sight of the Lord and following the deities of those nations around them. The cycle continues for the tribes of Israel. This sets things up for the next judge, Samson. We're going to pause there for the episode. Though it will be a short episode, we're going to take some time to learn who the Philistines are in the next episode. They are a people group who will be around for a very long time. There's also a side to Samson that we're going to look at that may have affected more than just the Israelites' history. Greek mythology itself may have echoed the life of Samson. So join us next time in episode 115. Until next time, remember that you are loved, special, and worthwhile.